Okay, so welcome everyone. It's been quite a tumultuous period that we've all lived through in the past few days, the past week. It seems almost difficult to believe that a week ago we were on the verge of, World War III. And at this moment, we know that there is great conflict, great violence, great famines. So we are definitely living in interesting times. So I thought this morning we could reflect on how do we respond as practitioners. And one of the adages that I often refer to, it's how do we respond to difficult circumstances? How we respond, not how do we, is the measure of our practice. So I'd like to look at and reflect on how we have navigated the past week and how we can move forward applying the teachings in increasingly effective and mindful ways. So first, I invite you to think about what it felt like when we learned that there was bombing, another conflict starting, the bombing of Iran, on top of Gaza and Israel and Ukraine, and just in terms of the most intense conflict zones. So let's just think of early this week and our mental state. And one way you might have been responding, you might have noticed, was anxiety, of course, despair perhaps, but also the very common mental tactic of hope and fear arising alternately. So hope and fear is one of the worldly concerns that the Buddha identified as and not only a common response, but a circular kind of response, or more like ping pong, if you can imagine a ping pong game. One moment we're responding with fear. How is this going to affect us, affect me, affect my community, my family? Fear rising as an empathetic response to the people who were experiencing great conflict, and then hope. Maybe it will end, maybe there will be a peacemaker, maybe the diplomacy will work, maybe they won't inflict revenge on the US. So there's this response that just goes back and forth, hope and fear, hope and fear. And we can almost spend a whole day engaged in fairly direct, just hope and fear with not much else in between. So that's a response to the outward circumstances, but you might also notice that arises when something is, let's say, physically wrong with you. You get a medical diagnosis, or somehow your plans are interrupted. Hope, fear, hope, fear, hope, fear. So let's say that's one of the most common responses, but the second, or tied in difficult circumstances, is our favorite escape tactics. Do you need to just zone out? Do you fall prey to screen addiction? Do you go immediately towards sugar or towards TV or towards anything that will occupy your mind other than what is going on. You might overwork. You might get into arguments with your family. You might find that little irritating things in where and how you're living become greatly exaggerated in your mind. It's just get me out of here looking at this tremendous shock of the world condition. So first, I want to invite you to just take a few minutes to look at how you navigated the week and last weekend. And you might have your own inventive way of finding yourselves trapped in habitual thinking or trapped into escapes that I didn't mention. But just take a minute to look at how much of the time was occupied in the habitual patterns of our mind. So let's take just a couple minutes to reflect. Now, as you're observing your own responses to the shock of this new crisis, notice how much of the response when we're looking at hope and fear or escape is combined with an inner narrative of I, me, and mine. And as we're looking, this is not in any way judging or shaming. Essentially, we're looking at the strength of our habitual patterns and the strength of the incessant thinking, incessant conceptuality, and the strength of the cycle of samsara. It's like a riptide keeping us in samsara. I noticed when the Dharma broke through, it broke through with our Lojong, or our wonderful mind training system that many of you were participating in a year's worth of training in Lojong. But there's an incredible slogan, when the world is filled with evil, transform all mishaps into the path of Bodhi, or the path of awakening. So at some point, I'm sure your devotion to Dharma started poking holes through the stickiness of samsara. But this one Lojong slogan is so helpful for times like these, when it feels like the circumstances are overwhelming. As it says, filled with evil, transform everything into the path of awakening, small and large into the path of awakening. And I want to combine this with paraphrasing a quote by Father Greg Boyle. Father Greg Boyle is an extraordinary Jesuit priest who started Homeboys Incorporated, or Homeboys Industries Incorporated. And this training system went from working with one gang in one neighborhood to, at this point, over 1,000 gangs worldwide. And the point that he makes, you can see it sort of like his stock speech, is essentially bodhicitta, or loving kindness, can transform everything. But then he put it in a way that was applicable to this Lojong slogan, a very similar teaching. This is the moment where we break or awaken. When the world is filled with evil, this is the moment where we break or awaken. We break with the riptide of samsara carrying us into habitual patterns, and we awaken when we break the chains of those habitual patterns, whether it's just to take a deep breath, whether it's to interrupt our favorite escape tactic for just a minute. Every time we become aware in difficult circumstances, we're using the circumstances to awaken, not to break down into despair. So I'd like you to reflect on how the Dharma broke through your habitual patterns this week, and really affirm the capacity that you have to stop the patterns, the weight and strength of the patterns for however amount of time. Literally, when we're doing the training for difficult circumstances, 1 second is monumental. It is a break in a multitude of lifetimes of keeping the patterns and strengths of samsara propelling us into deeper and deeper ignorance like quicksand. Just find one moment, even if it was looking out at the blooming flowers, a moment of delight breaks a pattern of despair. So it's normal for me to go to the Lojong slogans. That's something I've trained in for many years, and it's part of the Mahayana Buddhist tradition. And we can say that, all sanghas, all lineages have their home-based teachings. And so, of course, we share the Lojong slogans or the mind training slogans with all of Mahayana Buddhism, but it's been particularly strong in my training and what I teach. And then with the strength of that, immediately Tonglen, or sending and taking, sending loving kindness and taking suffering, our Tonglen practice might have come to mind for you. So we have these responses once we've broken the cycle, where we switch from the view of how am I feeling, why is this scary to me, or I'm wallowing in despair, wallowing in anxiety, imprisoned by hope and fear, to thinking of others. Immediately moving into Tonglen, for instance, if I'm in despair, many are in despair, let me take on despair and send out loving kindness. So that training that we return to over and over again in this Sangha, the Tonglen and the loving kindness, we return to it over and over because we want it to be so familiar that when things are triggering, before the blinders come on, the blinders of fear or despair, we can go, oh, I see this is happening. I'm breaking the pattern. I'm switching to loving kindness or Tonglen. So in the recent months, we've been studying the Heart Sutra, and I know sometimes it seems as though it's, I don't want to say dry philosophy, but philosophy that's sort of in a book, not in our lives. So a philosophy that starts our mind contemplating, but doesn't work its way into a kind of usefulness. So I want to point out why the Heart Sutra is so critical for times like this, for just this moment. And I was listening to a Joan Halifax lecture, and she brought up a couple of quotes that I just loved, and I thought they were applicable to our studies. And one was, a student asked Bill McKibben. Bill McKibben is the man who's started, I think it's 360.org, who spent his life working on climate change. So never giving up, he's still working on climate change. And he often gets asked the question, what can I do as an individual? And his response is, don't be an individual. So I think that is exactly what the Heart Sutra is trying to shift in us. Don't be an individual. See the actual nature of reality. And it teaches the actual nature of reality in both in an affirming way and a negating way. And then you can see, okay, different teachers, when they're teaching their students about the Heart Sutra, they might emphasize one or the other, but it's two ways of looking at the same thing of don't be a separate self and individual. Don't be inwardly focused. Shift to form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is none other than emptiness, emptiness is none other than form. which we're approaching from Thich Nhat Hanh's perspective, the emphasis of interbeing. So we have the one example of this non-separateness is in fact an extraordinary web of interbeing, interconnectedness, interdependence. And every time our mind starts to separate as an individual and just focus inwards of how does this feel to me? I am scared. I'm in despair. Oh my goodness. I am focusing on an artificially constructed I. And so the deconstruction of that I, of it's not this, not this, not this, any and every way we start to construct this I, when we look at it, it's not there, because this individual separate I is an illusion, whereas the reality, when we sit and contemplate it, is a vast interconnection with all of life. So we are the person sending the bombs, and we are the people being bombed. We are interconnected with all sentient beings, and every little action of ours reverberates in the same way that all of these actions that are shocking are reverberating. We just don't see the reverberations as clearly because they're subtle. The bomb is horrifyingly shocking, and the Tonglen and the prayers of loving kindness and the individual actions that affirm interbeing and interconnection feel very, very soft and fragile, like the roots of a plant. So the Heart Sutra is helping us see the difference between the illusion that we're creating that then leads to aggression and the heightened emotion of, all of the destructive emotions, pride, greed, aggression, addiction, jealousy. And we can see them all operating in these fields of conflict. This isolated separateness that demands protection and escalates into these poisonous emotions is something that we construct. Whereas the natural state, the state when we look at it and we see reflected, I'm looking out my window and seeing the woods and the trees and thinking of its reflection in the roots of the trees, of this interconnection, not just of all humans, but all beings and all of life. That is what is. So when we study the Heart Sutra, we're undermining the habitual patterns, and we're, sort of taking brick by brick the giant obstacle that keeps us trapped in this self-focus, this illusory self-focus. We're just at the most subtle way, in an obvious way, but in a subtle way, we're looking at where is the thinking that allowed me to become trapped in samsara, to be trapped in the illusion, to be so easily swayed by destructive emotions? How do I look at the root or the core of thinking that built this great ignorance? And how can I use the push of the logic in the Heart Sutra to break through that illusion, so that natural state becomes my home base, the natural state that abides in the interdependence, interbeing, and keeps strengthening that, even when there are aspects of life that are at the moment very, very cruel and very destructive. So the other quote I want to leave you with, because Joan Halifax is a Zen teacher, one of the trainings they go back to over and over again is the Zen koans, these wonderful conversations between great masters and students. And in this koan, the student asks the teacher, well, what is a bodhisattva before awakening, before enlightenment? And the teacher says, all beings. And then the student says, well, what then is enlightenment? What is a Buddha when awakened? And the teacher says, all beings. So let's take that in. The great teaching of interbeing, the bodhisattva path of the natural state is interconnectedness. The natural state is all beings. The opposite of the separate, confused self is all beings. Not separate, simply all beings. So I'd like to give everyone a chance to talk about how they were navigating this past 10 days or so. So I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. If you prefer to just sit and contemplate, that's also a wonderful thing to do, and maybe focus on these beautiful quotes. This is the moment we break or awaken. What is the natural state? The difference of a bodhisattva and a Buddha and our own natural state that is not quite clear to us, all beings. What is a bodhisattva before enlightenment? All beings. What is a Buddha as an enlightened being? All beings. So the breakout rooms are closing, and I'll do a short dedication for the YouTube recording. Bodhicitta, excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher.